Hello and welcome back to our video lectures for advanced level design class. I will be talking for this learning unit about world geometry, and we cover the topics from chapter 4 of the first volume of your textbooks, Mastering Unreal Technology. We'll be learning about what geometry means and what it is in the context of Unreal Engine, and we will learn about essential tools that would enable us and allow us to create basics of our levels and how to create playable environments within your level. It's basically the idea of prototyping our levels. For that, we use the tool that is called Brush in Unreal Engine and the Unreal Editor, and we learn about key terms and concepts about binary space partitioning and constructive solid geometry. When we talk about brushes, we use the term BSP, and we did that last learning module when you learn about creating a playable level, and the first content that you created was two BSP brushes for two rooms, and we used constructive solid geometry in an additive format to set up your basic environment, and then two subtractive constructive solid geometries. You subtracted two rooms in your environment, one square room and one cylindrical room. One thing that I want you to notice is when you're creating your levels and manipulating levels in Unreal, the engine uses something that is called uh, binary space partitioning. We won't cover what binary space partitioning is in general. You can search it online and learn about what it is. But what essentially it means is that each level is made up of a binary space, and you're either within that space or outside that space. And whatever you do as far as the rendering materials are concerned, or the AI is concerned, or the physics is concerned, and all the topics within the context of a binary space partition can happen within that space, and everything else outside the space would be the subject of another partitioning. So so that's as far as the BSP is concerned. So all of your brushes are BSP brushes here, and then you create constructive solid geometry, or essentially your world geometry, by applying those brushes. All of the BSP objects that you create revolve around the placement of your brush, and the brush basically is it's basically, can think of it as a paintbrush. So if you're looking at a box brush, your brush looks like this red brush or red box, and whatever you do, an additive geometry adds that cube to your level. A subtractive geometry subtracts that cube from your level. So if you apply an additive geometry, you would add geometry to the level. So here's an additive brush, and if you subtract from it, you'd basically be able to create different kinds of geometry within your level. So, but let me just take these out for now. So that's basically the idea. So your red builder brush is the most important brush in your level, and it's what actually creates your geometry one at a time. You can think of this as a template that you can create additive and subtractive brushes as I just showed you. And this red wireframe is what your current red builder brush looks like. And you can apply, as I show you a little bit later within this learning module, how you can apply different transformations on your red builder brush and create complex brushes and then apply them. There are two different types of objects and geometry that you can create, as we have seen so far: additive geometry and subtractive geometry. Those are the two basic ways that you could create and add brushes to your level. And then there are two other complex geometries that you can create: intersects and de-intersect. We'll cover those things in a little bit when we talk about how you can create and use different kinds of primitives in your level. These are essentially the Boolean operators that you can apply. So for now, we are mostly concerned with the constructive solid geometry and the brush area. In your setting up of the level, you will have the camera mode, which shows you how your level looks like at any given time, and you have the geometry mode, which would allow you to manipulate your geometry. And so when you click on geometry, you'll go to the geometry mode, your geometry tool will be activated, and then you can apply different kinds of modifiers. You can have passive modifiers and active modifiers, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. So for now, we are in the camera mode. One thing that I want you to know is that whatever you do as far as adding brushes, for example, I add an additive brush here and then subtractive geometry there. Let's change the properties of this brush by right-clicking on the cube, build it, and so now your red builder brush looks differently, and then I'll subtract some more from this brush, and there you have it. So what happens here is that whatever you do, I just applied a bunch of series of subtractive and additive geometries. Whatever you do is that you need to build your level, and this is the most important thing when you're dealing with binary space partitions. Your world geometry is not going to be created before you actually build your geometry. So a binary space partition brush, such as this red builder brush, is not by itself on its own geometry. You need to create your geometry. To create your geometry, you could click on the build geometry for visible levels on the toolbar, or you can go to build and create and click on build geometry from current level for visible levels, or build all, which means that you'll build your paths, you'll build your geometry, you'll build your lightings, and so on. So if you play this level from here, well, actually it's already been built, so you already have it. But nothing will actually happen unless you create and you build your levels. And once you build your level, then everything will be there, including the lighting and everything. So, and in order to apply your lighting to your level, you would have to click on build lighting. We did that several times last time. And then you will see the shadows updated, and so and your lighting applied to your level. So here is your level after you build the geometry. Okay, let's move towards where we'll see the light better, and let me move your geometry. Let's subtract some geometry here. I subtracted the geometry. You won't see anything applied to your level, and the lighting will not be essentially as pronounced. And so in order to make your level or create your level, you would have to essentially build the geometry, build the lighting. Every single time you do any changes to your level, you would have to make and build your geometry and lighting for your perspective view to be updated as you need it to be. Make sure whenever you build your lighting, uncheck the light mask option to disregard your essentially ambient lights. Otherwise your build will take so much time. So you usually use the light mask and build your light mask whenever you're ready for your final view of your geometry and the light interactions with your materials. Okay, so we talked about what a additive geometry and a subtractive geometry essentially are. One of the things that you need to take care of is when you have brushes that are touching. For example, when you have two additive brushes and on one side they are basically touching each other, those materials that are applied on the sides that are touching and not visible to the camera, they will be essentially in your level. And one way to get a performance boost is to clean your BSP materials. When you clean BSP materials, what happens is that unnecessary material references will not be created, or the geometry that doesn't it is not necessary because it's on two faces of the brushes that are touching and will never be rendered, will not be rendered, and this would give you essentially a performance boost. Basically what it does is that the rendering engine could skip these surfaces and basically give you a faster rebuild result. They can do binary clean BSP materials, and as you see here, you didn't have any BSP material references, so nothing needed to be cleared in this particular level. In some levels, that could increase your building performance. Okay, so in this level, now what I did is that I went ahead and I selected all the brushes that I have created, and I deleted them, and this is my red builder brush, and I'm building my geometry, and I'm building my light one more time, and I'm going now to go ahead and show you how you can manipulate your BSP brushes and create geometry, complex geometry in your scene, and show you some tips basically that you can use to finish up your mini assignment for this unit. In this unit, what we want to do is that we want to basically go ahead and recreate a Greek temple, and then you want to kind of cut some parts of the Greek temple as if it was destroyed, and basically give that sort of visual to your temple. To do this, I'll just show you how you can, for example, create a very large base for your table using an additive geometry. And what I have here is I'm using the template view, or the template for the new map in Unreal. What I want you to do is to create a blank map and then use the contents of the 4th chapter packages from the DVD that comes with the book, and use that as your base level, and then create your temple there. So if you want to create just basically a big base for your temple, just right click on a cube, and then on X, Y, and Z we will make a, as the book wants, 1792 along the X direction units, and then you have 3328 for the Y direction, and 32 units for Z. And as you see here, this is now your brush and how your brush looks like. Notice you don't have the geometry yet, and when even you move your brush to a nice place on your map, you still won't have the geometry until you actually go ahead and create your geometry by clicking on the add brush. Now, to show you how it looks like before you create a brush, if you create a brush right now, what will happen is that an empty material will be applied to your brush. So what we want to do is we want to basically go ahead and apply some materials prior to creating our brush. Okay, so let's first place the brush on the surface of the unit, and then you'll open Content Browser, and then you choose a material that is a stone material. Now you can choose the stone material from the contents of your DVD that you added, and I will just go ahead and choose one of the stone materials from my browser. Choose this material base. Okay, now my geometry is created, and as you see, the base material is applied to the geometry, and so it is how it's supposed to look like. Okay, a couple of notes about adding geometry to your level, whether it's additive geometry or a subtractive geometry, is the fact that precision is everything. And to make sure that you are using the precision that you need in placement of your brushes, you would need to make particular attention to what is called the drag grid. It's basically the grid lines that you see on your viewports. So to show you how the grid works, just let's look at the bottom right of the screen, and you will see that you will have the basically your grid movement, your grid rotation, and your grid scale. What that means is that if you click on the drag grid here and uncheck it, your movements are not going to be bound to the grid steps, so you could move freely, which makes it sometimes difficult for you to adjust your objects together. So you want to make sure that you always have your drag grid toggles on the rotation, the translation, and the scale. Now in this case, my drag grid is toggled at 8 units. So each of the movements that I have, or the movements, if you look at the squares here, each of these squares is 8 units, and when I move, I just move one step at a time. Now if I click on the button and change the 8 to 16, then my grid movements will be 16 units long. So if you notice here, when I change to 16, the drag grid basically became larger. So 32 becomes larger, and 64 in this case now is outside of my boundary in my side viewport. And if you zoom out, you'll see that now your movements are going to be based on 64 units. And so let's go back to, let's put it on the 16 units. If you look at the top toolbar, you will have translation mode, rotate mode or rotation mode, scale mode, and non-uniform scale mode. But each of these are, if you haven't worked with any three-dimensional graphics application before, the translation widget allows you to move or translate your brushes. The rotation widget actually allows you to rotate your brushes around. And here you see that I'm rotating the brush. And the scale, the uniform scale, allows me to uniformly increase or decrease the size of the brush. And non-uniform scale would allow me to non-uniformly change the size of the brush along each of the directions, X, Y, and Z. And so that's one point. Another point that I want to make, let me just make the brush smaller so you would be able to see the brush. So here I have the brush built. Let's see, where did it go? Up there, and let's move it down. So now you can see the brush in here. So the translation widget allows me to move it. In the rotation mode, I can rotate my brush, as you see here, along X, Y, or Z direction, and the scale mode allows me to scale the brush down or up accordingly. And so you can apply the drag grids. Basically, the rotation here is at about 5.63 degrees. You can change it. For example, if you change your rotation at 45 degrees, then each movement that you make, it basically snaps your rotations at 45 degrees. So this will give you control over how much you want to rotate your objects. And same thing with the scaling. One of the things that, especially in the rotation of your brushes, you might need to consider, and it might be helpful for you, is to notice about the pivot. So what you see here when you click on the brush, the pivot is basically centered at the center of your brush. So here I'm zooming in, and you see that the pivot is centered on the center of the brush. What that means is that if I rotate my brush, see here I'm rotating my brush, so it rotates the brush around the pivot point, which is the center of the brush, as you see here. Now if you wanted to rotate your brush at one corner of the brush, you would just basically right click on one of its vertices. So here I right click on the left vertex, or the right vertex, or the right bottom vertex, or the left bottom vertex, and it changes and moves your brush to that vertex. And when you rotate your brush now, the rotation pivot is now at this vertex instead of the center, so you can rotate your brushes around their newly selected pivots. And when you left click outside and reselect your objects or your brushes, you will have their rotation set in the center. As you see here, I'm showing you one more time here in the top viewport. So when you click on a brush, you will have the rotation pivot at the center, so you can rotate your brush around its center, as you see here. And but if you wanted to rotate the brush from each of its vertices, or you wanted to change your pivot point, you could change your pivot points, and so you could rotate your objects around any of their vertices. Another thing that I want to talk about here is the order of your brushes. It is very important for you when you create your brushes to keep in mind their orders. So if you construct a level of a multi-story building with BSP brushes that has a large cube subtraction, and later you decide that you wanted this building to be inside a cylindrical subtraction, you could just go ahead and delete your latest cube subtractive or subtractive cube and then just subtract a cylinder. However, this does not work, and so when you build your geometry, you find that the entire building was disappeared. This is because the brush are created in a specific kind of order. So the last operation that you perform is your latest operation. And if you undo that last operation, all of the operations that you have done within that operation, they will be eliminated. To change the brush orders, you could simply right click on them and then choose the correct order. So if you click on brush order, then you could move a brush to the first, or you could move the brush to the last order. So for example, if you created another brush or another piece of geometry here, okay, and here I'm just changing my grid. And then if I create a new brush or a new piece of geometry by an additive geometry out here, then you would see that these brushes in the top or side or bottom or front viewport, I can right click on them and I can change their order basically to last or to first, and this way you will be your brush orders will be basically manipulated and changed.